You want to know why I never sleep with the lights off anymore? Sit down and let me tell you about what happened when I was 13. I swear on my life, every word is true. My family used to visit our relatives in the remote moors of Northumberland every summer. You know those places where the fog never quite lifts and the sheep outnumber people 1,000 to 1? That's where my mother's family lived, in a stretch of farmland so isolated that even GPS signals seemed to die there. The journey from our London flat took forever. As we drove north, civilization gradually peeled away like old paint. First the shopping centers disappeared, then the petrol stations, until finally we were bouncing along dirt tracks that hadn't seen maintenance since the war. My brothers and I always knew we were close when we started smelling that thick, earthy stench, a mixture of wet wool, manure, and something else I could never quite identify. Something metallic. Grand's farmhouse squatted in the valley like a blood clot, literally painted crimson from foundation to roof. Local tradition, Mum said. The color was supposed to protect against, well, she never finished that sentence. The building had been in our family for generations, surrounded by stone walls that seemed designed more to keep things in than out. My mother came from a massive Catholic family, 13 siblings who produced so many cousins I'd given up counting. Yet despite the family size, that valley always felt empty. Conversations died too quickly. Laughter never echoed quite right. Even the sheep seemed to graze in deliberate silence. That particular summer, my brothers Michael and James had discovered girls and wanted nothing to do with their baby brother. Thank God for my cousin Moira, a fierce redhead my age who knew every hidden path and forbidden corner of the property. She taught me which fields to avoid after dark, which stone circles to never step inside, and why you should never follow the sheep trails that led into the forests. The old places remember, she'd say, tracing patterns in the dirt with a stick. And some memories have teeth. Everything changed on a humid Thursday evening that reeked of approaching storm. Uncle Connor found me reading in the hayloft and asked if I wanted to see something special, a calf being born at the McKenna farm. About time you learned the facts of life, boy, he said, but his smile looked painted on. I should have noticed how his hands trembled as he started the truck. The McKenna place was a 40-minute drive through countryside that seemed to reject human presence. The hedgerows pressed against the road like curious giants, and I swear I saw shapes moving between the trees that didn't match any animal I knew. When we finally arrived, 4 men stood waiting at the gate, all dressed in oilskins despite the warm evening, their faces hidden under wide-brimmed hats. The moment I stepped out, the temperature plummeted. My breath misted in a suddenly frigid air, and the smell hit me like a physical blow, copper and ammonia and something ancient, like opening a tomb. One of the men, massive as a standing stone, grabbed Connor's arm hard enough to leave marks. "Why'd you bring the boy?" His voice sounded like gravel being crushed. "You know what moon it is?" "He needs to see," Connor replied, and I'd never heard him sound afraid before. "His family's planning to move here. The blood calls to blood." They argued in low, urgent voices, using words that sounded almost like English but not quite. Finally, they seemed to reach some agreement and began walking into the field. I hurried after them, my trainers squelching in mud that felt too warm, too thick, and seemed to pull at my feet with each step. The field stretched endlessly into darkness. Our torches created a bubble of yellow light that made the shadows dance and writhe. Somewhere in that blackness, something was breathing wet, labored sounds that no cow should make. Then I heard the singing. It drifted across the field like mist, a woman's voice, crooning a lullaby in a language that predated words. The melody made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The men walked faster, and I had to jog to keep up, fighting the urge to clap my hands over my ears. We found them in the field's far corner, 3 more farmers and a woman in a tattered shawl, standing in a perfect circle around a cow. But this was no ordinary animal. Its hide was the color of dried blood, and symbols had been carved into its flesh, symbols that seemed to squirm in the torchlight. And there was Moira, standing rigid as a statue, her eyes rolled back to show only whites. "The cycle continues," the woman in the shawl whispered. "As above, so below." I started toward Moira, but Connor's hand clamped on my shoulder like a vice. "Don't break the circle," he hissed. "Not now. Not during the crossing." That's when I noticed the cow's belly. It wasn't just swollen, it was moving. Not with the normal movements of labor, but with something that seemed to be fighting its way out from the inside. The singing grew louder, more discordant, and I realized it wasn't coming from the woman. It was coming from inside the cow. Blood pooled on the grass, too much blood, and in the torchlight it looked black as oil. The cow's eyes rolled wildly, and when our gazes met, I saw intelligence there. Human intelligence. And pure, undiluted terror. Then something emerged. The head came first, a normal calf's head, covered in that viscous red slime of birth. But as more of it slid free, my mind simply refused to process what I was seeing. Where there should have been a calf's body. Human. The body was human. Not deformed or mutated, perfectly formed human torso, arms, and legs, all attached to that bovine head. Its skin was marble pale in the darkness, and I could see each delicate rib, each tiny finger. It looked like someone had sewn a calf's head onto a child's corpse. But it wasn't dead. The thing lifted one perfect human hand toward the sky, fingers grasping at nothing. The calf head turned, and when it opened its mouth, the sound that emerged shattered something fundamental in my understanding of the world. It was trying to cry a human baby's cry forced through an animal's throat. The sound was wet, strangled, impossible. And then it spoke. One word, garbled but unmistakable: mother. Moira's body convulsed like she'd been electrocuted. Her mouth opened and that same singing poured out, not from her throat, but from somewhere deeper. Her eyes snapped back to normal and locked onto mine. "You're not supposed to be here," she said in a voice that wasn't entirely hers. The blood wasn't ready. The invitation wasn't given. Everything happened quickly after that. A van arrived, unmarked, medical-looking. The driver wore a veterinarian's coat, but the instruments he carried belonged in no animal hospital I'd ever seen. Glass syringes filled with luminous fluids. Silver tools inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at. And a cooler that made sounds, soft, mewling sounds. Connor dragged me to a tractor and shoved me inside with Moira. We sat there for hours while the adults worked. Through the dirty window, I watched them moving with practiced efficiency. The woman in the shawl painted symbols on the ground. The veterinarian did something to the creature. And all the while, that horrible singing continued, now coming from multiple throats. "Tell me what's happening," I begged Moira. She was herself again, but changed. Older somehow. Her green eyes had flecks of gold that caught the light like a cat's. "The land here is thin," she said finally. "Things slip through. Things that want to be born but can't manage it on their own. So they borrow." "Borrow what?" "Bodies. Wombs. Lives." She pulled her knees to her chest. "Usually animals. Sometimes." She didn't finish. "How long has this been happening?" "Always. Since before the Romans. Since before names." She turned to look at me fully. "Your mother knows. She was here when her sister Catherine gave birth. When the midwife delivered something with a human body and a lamb's head. Something that lived for 6 days and called her mama the whole time. Catherine. I'd seen that name on a headstone in the family plot, but Mum said she died young. Before I was born. They buried it with her," Moira continued. "In the same coffin. Said it was her baby, and maybe it was. Maybe that's all any of us are, things that slipped through and borrowed human shapes. Maybe that's why your mum left and swore never to come back. But she had come back. Every summer. Dragging us with her. The blood calls to blood," I repeated Connor's words. Moira nodded slowly. "The valley doesn't let go." "Not really. It just gives you longer leashes sometimes." When the adults finally returned, their clothes were different. Clean. The veterinarian's van drove away, but not before I saw them loading something heavy into the back. Several somethings, wrapped in veterinary bags that moved independently. Connor drove us home in silence. Moira stared out the window, occasionally humming fragments of that awful lullaby. When we reached the farmhouse, it was nearly dawn. The red paint looked like fresh blood in the early light. Mom was waiting, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. The moment she saw my face, she knew. "He was supposed to show you a normal birth," she snarled at Connor. "A normal one. There are no normal births here anymore, Sarah. You know that. The barrier's too thin. They're coming through faster now." She pulled me into her room, hands shaking as she gripped my shoulders. "Tell me everything. Don't leave out a single detail." So I told her. About the creature. About the singing. About things that borrowed bodies to be born. Her face went paler with each word. "I thought it had stopped," she whispered, pulling me against her chest. "I thought if we never moved here permanently, if we just visited. I thought the land would be satisfied with that." "Mom, what does it want?" She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. "Then, to come home. They always want to come home." She made me swear never to tell Dad or my brothers. Made me promise on her grave that this secret would die with us. I agreed, too shaken to argue. We left 3 days later. I refused to return the next summer, and the summer after that. Found excuses. Summer camps. Friends' houses. Anything to avoid that valley of borrowed flesh. But here's what haunts me, what keeps me awake at night with every light in my flat burning. Last month, I had to go back. Mom died suddenly, brain aneurysm, they said. The funeral was in the valley, in that old churchyard where we buried our secrets. As I stood by her grave, I noticed things I'd missed as a child. The dates on the headstones. The number of infant deaths. The way some graves were far too small for the dates listed. And there, next to Mom's fresh plot, a weathered stone I'd never seen before. Catherine Marie Sullivan, beloved daughter born human, died otherwise 1992 to 1998. 6 years old. The same age as the thing that had called her mama. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the other mourners. My cousins, who moved with too much grace. The locals, whose eyes reflected light in ways human eyes shouldn't. My brothers, who'd been visiting the valley every summer without me, who now smiled with too many teeth. And my own reflection in the church window, eyes that now had flecks of gold, fingers that bent in ways I'd never noticed before. The singing started during the service. Soft at first, that same ancient lullaby from the field. One by one, the congregation joined in. Even my brothers. Even me, though I didn't know the words. We sang as they lowered Mom's coffin. We sang as they threw dirt on the polished wood. We sang as something in the coffin sang back. After the service, Moira found me by the churchyard gate. She looked exactly the same as she had 20 years ago. Exactly. "The blood always calls to blood," she said. "And the valley always collects its debts." I drove back to London that night, but I can't stop hearing the singing. Can't stop feeling the pull northward. Can't stop noticing how my reflection changes a little more each day. Last week, I found myself browsing real estate listings in Northumberland. Yesterday, I caught myself humming that lullaby while washing dishes. And this morning, I woke up with mud on my feet and grass stains on my clothes. My car keys were on the nightstand, warm to the touch. The fuel gauge showed I'd driven 300 miles in the night. North. Always north. The valley wants us home, you see. All of us who carry the blood. All of us who were born in the space between human and otherwise. And the worst part? The part that makes me keep every light burning? Sometimes, late at night, I catch myself wondering if any of us were ever really human at all. Or if we're all just things that slipped through, wearing borrowed faces, waiting for the call to shed these disguises and return to what we really are. The singing's getting louder. I can hear it even now, under the traffic in the London rain. Calling me home. Calling all of us home. I'll probably be gone by morning. Back to the valley. Back to to the red house in the birthing fields. Back to where the barrier is thin and things slip through. If you hear singing tomorrow, don't listen. And whatever you do, don't let it make you remember what you really are. The blood always calls to blood. And the valley never forgets its children. Have you had a similar experience? Feel free to share in the comments below. This story is purely fictional. Any resemblance to real events is purely coincidental. If you enjoyed this story, please like and leave a comment. Your support means the world to me.